This is Roger Steele again. I'm the facilitator for the 6-week self-study asynchronous course with World Vision East Africa region from the 18th of March through the 26th of April 2013. This is video number 2B. That would be for the second week of the course, and this one I'm going to provide a content overview to try to hit some of the highlights. It certainly won't be comprehensive, but it might help some of you in your preparation for the examination and application. The previous video, number 2A, covered some of the administrative and processes for the course, including how to take the practice examination and introduction to the course practical project that you should start thinking about this week. I'm going to start with talking about the importance of the 5 principles and 6 disciplines of the PMD Pro. And let me again remind you that we are using the new revised version of the PMD Pro guide. The first version didn't have these principles and disciplines in it, so be sure you're in the right version. And when you take the practice exam, and also when you do the final exam, be sure that you tick the new exam so that you are making sure that you've studied and are taking and getting certified on the right one. So take a look at this slide and you'll see that on the left there are the 5 principles. These are principles that go throughout all of the phases and cover all of the PMD Pro. They aren't divided by time or particular phase. That PMD project management is balanced, comprehensive, integrated, participatory, and iterative. So those are the 5 principles, and I'll talk about some of those as we go through these sessions. I certainly won't cover them all in detail, but for the examination and application, make sure that you understand those. Then there are 6 disciplines of the PMD Pro: scope management, time, project resource, risk, project justification, stakeholder management. Also be sure that you keep aware of those disciplines and that you think about those and apply those as you're reading the PMD Pro1 guide and watching the videos and having any discussions that you might have. And please feel free to ask me any questions. So let's take a look at the phase model that you should be fairly familiar with, and this is actually the slide that we use for the project identification and design phase, which is the first phase. So you'll see that there are 5 phases in the what used to be called the life cycle model, which is now called the phase model. And you'll see that it goes from project identification and design to project setup. Then planning and implementation is an iterative or rolling wave process, or progressive elaboration. Those are 3 words that you should learn before the end of this course. And then monitoring, evaluation, and control is in the background. Control is probably the newest aspect. Monitoring, evaluation, as well as project identification and design and transition have a lot of similarity to what NGOs and World Vision are already doing. Project setup, planning, and implementation, of course, are new. And then the final phase is end of project transition. You're also going to see these triangles on the phase model. The triangles are decision gates. Be sure you know what a decision gate is. Decision gates are points where a reflection is done on data that has been collected, on problems or issues, as we call them in project management, have been logged and analyzed, and perhaps changes then are made in the project based upon those issues that are being encountered. All right, so that's the PMD Pro phase model. This would have been covered in the first week, the project constraint triangle. And again, it's foundational to the PMD Pro, that the constraint triangle is the foundation of the PMD Pro. If you can learn the project constraint triangle, you know a lot about project management. So basically, we're looking at three sides of an equilateral triangle that have to be kept in balance in order to control and implement projects. The three sides are scope and quality. Scope means the outputs or the tangible things that are being produced by the project, and they could be products and they could be services. And in the case of non-governmental organizations, there's sometimes less tangible services like advocacy or empowerment, those types of things. So those are probably pretty understandable from the log frame terminology, that you have inputs, you have activities, and those produce outputs, and those are the tangible things that are produced or the processes that are done. Then you have time, schedule, and that's very, very important. We often have problems and issues where projects have finished the time, their time has expired, but they haven't produced the scope that they're supposed to have. So you often have problems with time in your projects. And then the final one is fairly self-evident, which is the cost. That resources are extremely important. So if any one of these three gets out of balance, it's the job of the project manager to try to bring them back into balance through making changes that will control the project. And you'll see outside of the triangle, the project constraint triangle or the triple constraint, you'll see the risks are constantly pushing against all of these variables that you're trying to balance to try to make life difficult. And so this, in a nutshell, describes the job of the project manager and project management. So kind of keep that in mind as the basis of everything else that you read and study in project management. I wanted to mention this slide that there are the PMD Pro Guide talks about 4 different types of project manager competencies. I just wanted to point out that technical probably means something a little bit different than what most of you are accustomed to in World Vision. Technical to you probably means like water sanitation specialist, health, advocacy, child protection, those types of things. But in the project management world, the technical skills are what you are reading about and learning about this week in project management. So it will be things like how to do a problem tree, a log frame, an issues log, work breakdown structure, a Gantt chart, those types of things. So they're the technical skills for project management. The development specific skills will be what you would call technical outside of project management. Those would be, of course, the water sanitation, agriculture, those types of things. So I just wanted to sort of make that clear as you sort of read the guide. Otherwise, I'll let you sort of pick everything else up from your reading and the videos. And then I just wanted to mention the 3 categories of work that are involved in the identification and design phase, that there has to be a collection of data and an analysis of that data and looking at both the current state, what is the situation now, and then what do stakeholders want to have change so that they can get to their future state. And that's the way that we look at projects, and that has to be done in order to identify and make sure that you're implementing the correct project. And then once you have gone through collection analysis, identified the future state, then you can come up with your intervention. And often that is displayed and illustrated in the form of a logical framework. So that's kind of the way that it's presented in the PMD Pro. The purpose of data collection is to broadly explore issues related to community needs, existing strengths, identifying stakeholders, informing priorities, and identifying interventions. And the reason I'm showing you this slide is to emphasize that it's not going to help you to be really good at implementing if you are implementing the wrong project. So you need to make sure that you have identified the right project and that you implement it in the right way. We've seen examples, and I'm sure you've seen them in your work, where you discover that you're actually doing the wrong project, and even if you've done a good job of implementing it, that's extremely problematic. So the time to make good decisions, to do good analysis, and to do the best planning is in the identification and design phase. Let me show you this slide because sometimes people get a little bit confused. This is called the Bradshaw categories of social need, a way of triangulating the data of doing needs assessment. And there are 4 perspectives that Bradshaw talks about. There's felt need, expressed need, normative need, and comparative need. I don't think you'll have any problem with the normative need. That's like the expert using standards from their subject matter area, like a doctor looking at a situation from the standards, the norms, water sanitation, any number of things. Comparative need is then when people look at what somebody else is doing and they then get a vision of what they want to do. The 2 that people get a little bit confused about sometimes are felt and expressed needs. And felt needs, think about those as being the most basic needs. These are what people think or feel, and sometimes they can't even express them. Sometimes they can, but they're hungry, they're sick, they're dirty, they are oppressed, they're in a bad social situation. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about there. Expressed needs then are sort of the next level up, that people have not only felt a need, but they've actually taken some steps or identified what a solution or an improvement to that problem might be. So in the case of sanitation, people feeling like their conditions are unsanitary, they may actually have identified that latrines need to be built, or that there needs to be a hand washing campaign, or something like that. So I think that's pretty well explained in the guide, but I just wanted to mention that sometimes people get a little bit tripped up on that. And then I've already mentioned the current state analysis, that there are 2 types of stakeholder analyses. One of them is the Venn diagram. A Venn diagram is a tool that is used to using circles, and the placement of those circles and the size of the circles tell a story. And so they're often used to identify the stakeholder groups. This one happens to be, I think, one that's in your PMD Pro guide that comes from the Delta River fishing families case study from the fishing families perspective. And so a Venn diagram, that's VENN, is a way of trying to identify the stakeholders, the power relationships. So the size of the circle represents the power dynamic from the perspective of one of the stakeholders, in this case the fishing families, and then the distances between the ovals represent the status of the relationship, so that you can see whether there's a close relationship or a distant relationship. Though that's very useful in analyzing the stakeholders. And then a stakeholder analysis matrix goes the next step and provides a description of those stakeholders, their interest, how they're affected by the problem, their capacities, motivations, and possible actions that they might take. So that's a different tool. Just wanted to make sure you knew the distinction between those 2. I think a lot of you are already familiar with the problem tree from the work that you've done with Design Monitoring Evaluation, or LEAP. It's a very powerful tool that is not just used in project management, but a lot of different areas where you work with a group of people to identify a core problem, and then you ask them what causes that problem, and sometimes you even ask what causes that cause. So what are the contributors to the core problem? And then you say, because you have this problem, what are the direct effects? And then sometimes you can say, what are the effects of those effects? So that's just like getting branches on a tree or getting roots. And so that's a good way of sometimes presenting that. There's another method that's used or approach called appreciative inquiry that is more taking a positive approach, but I think the logic processes are very similar, so pay attention to that. Let me talk just briefly about the log frame. There are lots of questions on the exam about the log frame. The vertical hierarchy of objectives would be the goal, the outcomes, the outputs, and the activities, so that the PMD Pro framework uses 4 levels. And I know in World Vision, you'd have a 5th level that would be program goal, so that you'd have project goal and program goal. But just remember that the matrix in the PMD Pro is a 4x4 matrix with 16 cells, and this is the vertical hierarchy of objectives. If you accomplish the activities, then those will contribute to production of the outputs. If you produce the outputs, those will contribute toward the outcomes. If you produce the outcomes or see the outcomes come to fruition, those will contribute to the goal. That's the vertical logic. But the vertical logic isn't enough. You also have to have what's called the horizontal logic, and I've seen that some people get a little bit confused about this, or they could even have been taught this a little bit differently. So for PMD Pro, make sure you understand the definition of vertical and horizontal. So I've already explained the vertical, but that's not sufficient. That logic is linear. You have to add the vertical component of the assumptions. So vertical logic doesn't have anything to do with indicators or means of verification. It means adding the assumptions to the logic in this zigzag pattern, so that this is the way that you talk about the logic of the log frame now. You'll say, if the activities are produced and the assumptions at the activity level, and you'll see the assumptions at these 2 levels are the most important there in the red. If the assumptions at the activities level hold true, then you will produce the outputs. If you produce the outputs and the assumptions at the output level hold true, then you will contribute to the outcomes. If the outcomes happen, then the assumptions hold true at the outcome level, then you will contribute to the goal. And you could say the same thing about the project goal and the program goal if you're going to that level. So you say you need the vertical plus the horizontal logic in order to have a good intervention. And later on, you'll be reading about risk. Almost every assumption that's in the log frame will become a risk to be managed. And so that's a nice linkage to have there. And finally, the last thing I want to mention in this video is SMART. That when we talk about indicators, we use this acronym that you're familiar with probably, but make sure that you look at the specific words, well, the first one is specific, that are used in the PMD Pro, because they might be a little bit different, especially this one. I think some people tend to use the word realistic. PMD Pro uses relevant, so just make sure you understand when you're taking the examination that that's the way that the SMART is used here, because you want to make sure you understand the PMD Pro. Well, that was just a quick overview, and I wanted to hit those high points, and I'll try to do that for each of the modules to give you some tips. Don't hesitate to ask me questions through Skype or through email, and especially on the lingos.centraldesktop.com course website. You can just click on the discussion button. So let me encourage you that you should be finished studying modules number 1, number 2, and number 3 by this Friday, the 29th of March. Don't get behind. Try to stay on track with the course so that you don't have to do a lot of work in the last half or even in the last week of the course. So I'll look forward to talking to you in a video next week. Take care.